Hello again, this is Dr. Lindsay. And in this model, what I want to go over is the classical versus the Keynesian thinking about economics. So classical, what I mean by classical, I mean that the thinking before Keynes wrote his book, the thinking before 1930s. And if we're going to talk about aggregate demand, which is the demand for everything in the economy, so this is the total demand for everything in the economy, all goods and services. The classical thinking was something called Say's law, after a fellow named Say, which was supply creates its own demand. Supply creates its own demand. There was no theory about recessions or depressions. The thinking was if we were in a recession, we're just out of equilibrium. If there's unemployment, it just means the labor market is not in equilibrium. But with this law of supply and demand, prices will adjust and we'll get to equilibrium very quickly. And once we get to equilibrium, then the recession will be over and there will be no more unemployed people. So the solution then for a recession or depression is really not to do anything. The market will work itself out. The government doesn't have to step in and try to do something. Now, Keynes's thinking was quite a bit different. He came up with his ideas during the Depression in the 1930s. And he said, the problem is that there's a lack of demand. In the economy. That's the problem. People just aren't buying enough goods and services. So he wrote his book called The General Theory. People refer to it as just a general theory, but the title is The General Theory of Unemployment, Interest, and Money. And he laid out his ideas. Now, he thought that if we're in a recession or depression, we could be in a recession or depression for a long time. There might be some sort of equilibrium. There weren't any forces to push us back to full employment. He thought if people stop their buying, then we have this lack of demand. And the solution then of getting out of a recession is to somehow increase the aggregate demand in the economy. So rather than just sit and do nothing and let the economy get back to where it's supposed to be by itself, he said the government really needs to step in and do something and start buying things, start spending money, increase this demand for all the goods and services in the economy. And if the problem is because there's a lack of demand, then all we need to do is increase the demand, have the government step in, and then we'll get back to full employment much faster. So we thought, yeah, in the long run, we'll get back to full employment like the economists before him felt would happen, but it just might take a long time. And he's famous for saying that, yeah, in the long run, we're all dead. So what's the point? Yeah, the economy will get back to normal. We'll get out of a depression in the long run, but hey, we're all dead by then. And after he did his work here, he really didn't live a whole lot longer. He had a massive heart attack and unfortunately didn't get to do a lot of much more theoretical analysis of economics. Now, Keynes wasn't the only one to think this way, but he was the one who really came up with some good theories to explain his analysis. and he put it in his book called The General Theory. And that book really started the whole field of macroeconomics, because that was creating a model to understand the economy all by itself.